Welcome back to Differentiation of Instruction to Support Standards Implementation. Topic 3 is using data to inform instruction. The 3 objectives for this topic are identify and analyze various types of data used in formative assessment in order to understand student learning, how to apply some best practices in formative assessment to collect and utilize data to make instructional decisions, and finally, some strategies to differentiate instruction based on the data that's collected in order to meet student needs and optimize learning outcomes. Earlier in topic 1, unpacking the standards, I introduced the learning progressions. Once you unpack the standards, how it was important to organize the sequence of skills from simple to complex. In order to move students along that chain of simple to complex skills, the teacher needs to know and understand if they're ready to move on, when they're ready to move on, and how to move on. It's the data from those formative assessments that allow teachers to see where students currently are in their learning, and for you to plan specific next teaching actions. And when I say specific next teaching actions, that means in the minute or in the next lesson or the next day or within the week. It's not making those decisions for the students who are going to experience the same unit next year. So it's for immediate decision making. How do we get formative assessment data? Unfortunately, the word assessment is in formative assessment, and many people associate that with the word test. Formative assessments are not meant to be scores in a grade book. They are intended for you, the teacher, in order to make those immediate decisions about your next steps. Some examples of formative assessment could include just your observations, what you see students doing and saying during the learning process. It could be your anecdotal notes, brief records of student responses, participation, what you notice as you're walking around the room or when there's whole class interaction. It could be quizzes. It could be quick targeted checks on specific skills or content area. It could be exit tickets where students are summarizing what they've learned during a lesson. It kind of reveals what they took away, whether it was what you intended for them to take away or not. It could be homework, just looking for student outcomes on homework for you to make decisions in the moment, how instruction will proceed that day. So there's a lot of ways and a lot of areas to collect data for formative assessment. There are some qualities that you should consider when implementing and using data from formative assessments. Formative assessments themselves really focus on the learning. They identify strengths and weaknesses of the instruction in real time. So again, the formative assessment is looking at what the students are doing, saying, and learning, but it is reflecting on the instruction and what needs to change in the instruction. So it's real time, immediate. Another immediate portion to this is feedback, that students are receiving immediate feedback from the data. And that feedback informs their learning process. So it's informing you what to do. It's letting the students know you understand where they are, and it helps them understand what they need to do next to progress. So notice how right there, that's quite different from when we think of a test. Sometimes it's students take a test and they might not get the test grade for days, weeks. That's assessment of learning, whereas this formative assessment is assessment for learning. It's used for the purpose of continued learning. Quality number 3, it is engaging and interactive. Students are involved in the process, and that doesn't just mean that they're the victim of the assessment. They are engaged in maybe assessing themselves, maybe reporting out on where they progress to. It could be them assessing one another and giving feedback to one another. But the important thing here is that it's interactive and it offers multiple opportunities for the students to improve, meaning they're looking at the data, they make some decisions about what they need to do next. And number 4, there are differentiated approaches. There are several ways for you to formatively assess learning. And this will cater to the diverse needs and preferences of students, but it will also permit you to gather different types of data. Not all the information you need to guide your instruction can be gathered through just a standard multiple choice test. For you to practice identifying some higher quality formative assessments, or at least the parts of formative assessments, and look for those qualities, I'm going to ask you to navigate to the course document called Formative Assessment Analysis Exercise. On this document, there are several scenarios of assessments. I'd like you to go through and find the ones that are exemplars, that have those 4 qualities of high quality formative assessment, and which ones do not. And take a moment to maybe revise or add to or take away parts of ones that aren't really exemplar formative assessments. There are 8 different ones, and there is a key at the very bottom for you to check yourself. I have also included examples down at the bottom of those 4 qualities, but try not to cheat. See if you can just do it first and then check yourself. So go ahead and pause the video and come back when you have identified exemplar formative assessments. All the back work that you have been doing, where you've identified, you've unpacked the standard, you've written learning goals that are appropriate and organized, you've made sure you've identified the correct depth of knowledge level, and you've written success criteria in student-friendly language, then you get to use the information from the formative assessments. And you're going to use that information to make some decisions. Hitting the actual learning goal isn't a straight single path, and it's definitely not a straight single path for each student, and it may be a different path depending on the instructor and their strengths. So how do you know which path or paths to take in order to support students in meeting those success criteria? You're going to collect that formative assessment data. I now have another activity. Now that you understand the qualities of formative assessment, I have some scenarios for you. In these scenarios, it will describe an interaction in a typical lesson, just a short snippet of an interaction. And what I'd like you to do is try to identify the type of data collected, what that data might mean, and identify some next steps for the teacher to take based on the information they collected during this lesson. There are some example answers at the end of the document to compare with, but they are by no means the one and only correct answer. There may be various ways for you to interpret this. So go ahead and pause the video and work through a couple of case studies on collecting data in the moment. Now that you have identified qualities of formative assessment, you've analyzed some case studies of collecting that formative assessment data and making decisions, I'd like you to now try again. So that was imaginary. And now I want you to examine a recent set of learning goals addressed in your class. Something you did just this past week. Look at the learning goals that you had written, the success criteria, and I want you to identify the area where the students as a whole did the best. Where did most or all of them actually meet those success criteria? And then identify some of those learning goals that showed the least amount of growth. I want you to think about other ways you could target those learning goals. I want you to think about how you taught them, how you went about teaching the content and the skills the first time, and think about, are there other ways you could have done that? Think of strategies that you already use that you're comfortable with. So in a moment, again, you're going to pause the video and you're going to find the document in the syllabus named Examining Instruction and Setting Goals. And I want you to try this exercise, again, with the most immediate lesson or unit that you just completed, so it's fresh in your mind. Let's go ahead and pause and return when you are ready. Well, what were some new ways that you came up with to target the learning goals? Was it obvious? You thought, oh, well, now looking backwards, if I had only done this activity, or if I had only paired them up differently, more students would have reached that, that learning target or that learning goal or achieved success. So thinking that was what you wish you had done, the rethinking ways of a lesson that just passed. Now we want to think looking forward. Which one will you choose going forward, thinking about next week's lesson ahead of time? The more time that you spend reflecting on the practice of aligning the standard to the learning goals, to the depth of knowledge level, to the success criteria, to your formative assessments, the easier it will get. It seems overwhelming. I know there's a lot of steps, but it will become second nature. As soon as you can crystallize and see that through line from beginning to end, the easier your students will also see that through line and be able to meet those success criteria. The end goal is for you to do all of the aligning and predictions of how students will struggle before instruction. This way you get to act as a coach instead of a lifeguard. You can always pre-plan different ways to deliver content, which can address different levels of readiness before content delivery. If you've been in the classroom more than a day, you know that they're not all going to learn in one way, and they're not all going to be coming to you with the same level of readiness. So you can choose to be prepared for that ahead of time, or you can again be acting like a lifeguard afterwards. The next document that you have to work with is the differentiation instructional strategy lesson template. So now we finally get to lesson planning, what this whole giant topic has been about. It doesn't work unless you do all this pre-work. So now that you know what to look for, I want you to start planning ahead of your instruction. I want you to check out this lesson plan template that guides the process of differentiating instructional strategies based on your learning goals and your success criteria that are aligned with the standard. While you're looking over this, I also want you to be keeping in mind the different types of formative assessment data you're going to collect during the lesson. You don't need to complete this whole document now, but I want you to be thinking forward and start to jot down some of your ideas. You already know the standards that are coming up. Maybe you already have the learning objectives or the learning goals identified. Maybe you don't. You could use one that we did back in topic 1 and just transfer it over, because the next topic is going to prepare you for actual differentiating strategies. So go ahead and fill this in as much as you're able, and we will wrap up topic 3. After completing this small section, I'd like you to meet with your team and use some of the discussion questions about formative assessment data. I want you to think about reoccurring challenges your students face. What types of data could you collect to really think deeply and better understand the root cause of those challenges? Can you think of different ways to either use exit tickets or to use the data that comes from an exit ticket? I know that some teachers become overwhelmed thinking of giving out, collecting little slips of paper for exit tickets, and then some of them actually grade them. Instead, just sort them into piles of the students understood, the students didn't understand. Look which pile is bigger and use that to start tomorrow's instruction. So go ahead and spend some time with your PLC or your peers discussing some of the formative assessment data questions. The objectives for this section were to identify and analyze various types of data in formative assessment for understanding student learning, to apply the best practices, those 4 key qualities of formative assessment, and to think about differentiating your instruction based on that analysis. And all we did here was for you to think about the types of formative assessment, what information you could collect, and what tools do you already have in your toolbox to try some different instructional or assessment strategies. I'll see you at the next topic.